thrown out like she was nothing. Turns out she had $8.5 million, a heartbreaking story of a son who threw his mum out of the house. Let's get right in. The wind cut through Margaret's thin sweater as she stood alone on the porch, her suitcase trembling in her wrinkled hands. Behind her, the door slammed shut with a loud bang. Her son, Jacob, didn't even look back. After raising him with everything she had, she was now homeless, with no family, no warmth, and no reason to stay. Her eyes filled with tears, but what Jacob didn't know was that Margaret carried a secret worth $8.5 million. Margaret Green was a quiet woman from rural Ohio. She had once been a high school teacher, loved by students for her kindness and patience. Her husband, Frank, passed away 15 years ago, leaving her to raise their only child, Jacob, on her own. They had struggled. Margaret had worked 2 jobs, sometimes even skipping meals just to make sure Jacob could eat and attend school. She kept a modest home and rarely bought anything for herself. Her neighbors often wondered how she managed to keep going, but she never complained. Now, at 67 years old, she had thought retirement would bring peace. Instead, her own son had turned against her. Jacob had grown distant over the years. After marrying Melissa, a cold and sharp woman who never liked Margaret, things changed. Melissa often made snide remarks about Margaret's clothes, her old-fashioned ways, and how she always smelled like dust and cinnamon. Margaret had always ignored it. After all, she was family. She didn't want to cause trouble. But the tension had grown worse since Margaret moved in with them 6 months ago. Her tiny house had been sold after years of decline, and Jacob offered their guest room. Or maybe Melissa didn't give him much choice. At first, Margaret was thankful. She cooked meals, folded laundry, and even read bedtime stories to their little daughter, Sophie. But the smiles quickly faded. Melissa began complaining about her being in the way, saying things like, "This isn't a nursing home," and "She's just here to mooch off us." Margaret heard every word, though they whispered it behind closed doors. Then came the final blow. It was a cold Sunday morning when Jacob asked Margaret to step outside for a talk. She remembered how his hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from guilt. He couldn't even look her in the eyes. "Mom, it's not working anymore," he said. "Melissa and I talked, and you can't stay here." Margaret's heart cracked like thin ice. "I don't understand. I've done everything I could to help." Jacob sighed. "It's just, you're too old. It's too much. We have our own family now." She didn't cry. Not then. She just nodded slowly, went upstairs, and packed her small bag, the same one she had taken on her honeymoon so many years ago. As she stood on that porch, watching the sky darken, she felt smaller than ever. She didn't ask where she would go. She didn't want to beg. She had always been proud. Margaret didn't go far. She walked to a nearby bench at the edge of the park, dragging her suitcase behind her. She sat there for hours, clutching a wool blanket and her purse. Inside her purse was a small velvet pouch. No one knew about it. Not Jacob, not Melissa, not even her friends. The pouch held an old key. Years ago, before Frank passed away, he had whispered a secret to her on his deathbed. "Maggie," he had said, his voice dry and weak, "there's something in the cabin, in the floorboards. Don't tell anyone until the time is right." Back then, Margaret didn't understand. The cabin was a small, forgotten place in the Appalachian woods, something they had inherited from Frank's grandfather but hadn't visited in years. But after he died, she had gone. She had used the key and opened the creaky door. What she found changed everything. Inside a locked box beneath the floor was a stack of old savings bonds, antique coins, rare stamps, and a letter from Frank's grandfather, a banker during the Great Depression, explaining how he had hidden his wealth away to protect it from failing banks. Over time, with careful investments and growing interest, that hidden treasure had become worth $8.5 million. Margaret had never told anyone. Not Jacob, not even her closest friend. She believed in living simply. Money, she thought, wasn't what made a person rich. But now, as she sat on a cold bench, her joints aching and her stomach empty, she wondered, would things have been different if she had shared her secret? Would Jacob have treated her better if he had known? Was she foolish for keeping it hidden? That night, a kind woman at the church across the street offered her a cot and some hot soup. Margaret accepted, bowing her head in thanks. She didn't complain. She didn't tell her story. She just smiled and whispered, "God bless you." But as she lay on the narrow cot, the voices of the past returned. Frank's gentle laugh, Jacob's first words, Sophie's bedtime giggles. She clutched the velvet pouch close to her chest and promised herself something. Tomorrow she would return to the cabin. It was time to open the past, and maybe find a new future. Margaret's hands trembled as she boarded the dusty greyhound. And bus. She had no home, no family left who wanted her, and only $22 in her purse. But hidden in the bottom of her worn bag was a single key, a key to a secret so big it could change everything. If the world had thrown her away, she would return to the one place that never had, the old cabin where her true worth was buried under the floorboards. Margaret sat quietly by the window as the bus rolled through the flat Ohio farmland. The gentle hum of the engine almost lulled her to sleep, but the emotions swirling inside her heart kept her awake. Her old home. She hadn't seen the cabin in over a decade. It was deep in the Appalachian woods of West Virginia, a place where cell signals didn't reach and silence hugged every tree. Back then, she had found it strange that Frank's grandfather had left the cabin untouched. But now, it made sense. That hidden box, tucked beneath the floorboards of the bedroom, was never meant to be found by just anyone. She hadn't even told Jacob. He was only a teenager when she discovered the secret, and Margaret had believed it was best to keep it, hidden until the right moment. She wanted him to grow into a kind man, not one spoiled by greed or softened by riches. But now that decision felt like a terrible mistake. As the miles passed, Margaret stared out at the fields of green, the gas stations, the faded diners, reminders of a simpler America. An America she still loved, even though it felt like it had forgotten people like her. The bus stopped in a tiny town called Ravens Hollow. It was the closest stop to the cabin. Margaret stepped off with her suitcase and looked around. The air was cool, and pine trees stretched toward the sky like old friends welcoming her back. She walked to the small diner near the station and ordered a cup of coffee with her last few dollars. The waitress, a kind woman named Sherry, noticed the weariness in Margaret's eyes. "You traveling alone, hun?" Sherry asked, pouring the coffee. "Yes," Margaret replied, forcing a smile. "Just visiting an old family place." Sherry nodded. "Not many folks come around here. Be careful, those woods can get mighty lonely." Margaret sipped her coffee slowly. Her thoughts drifted to Jacob. Did he feel any guilt? Would he even care where she was now? She pushed the thought away. After resting at the diner for a bit, she began the walk toward the cabin. It was nearly 5 miles from the road, through winding dirt paths, thick trees, and memories she had buried long ago. Her knees ached, and the suitcase felt heavier with each step, but she pressed on. Nature seemed quieter here. No car horns, no buzzing phones, only the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. When she finally reached the edge of the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. There it was. The old cabin. It stood just as she remembered. Weathered wood, a slanted roof, and the porch where Frank once sat reading the newspaper. The door creaked as she opened it, and the smell of old cedar and dust wrapped around her like an old sweater. Margaret stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For the first time in days, she felt safe. She lit a few candles and opened the windows to let in fresh air. The cabin had no electricity, but she didn't need much. She set her suitcase down and reached for the velvet pouch. Inside, it was the small brass key, slightly rusted but still solid. She walked into the bedroom, her heart pounding. The floorboards creaked as she knelt beside the bed. She pulled up the old rug and used the key to unlock a hidden latch in the floor. With a firm tug, the wooden board came loose. There it was, a metal box. Margaret lifted it carefully. It was heavier than she remembered. She opened the lid and gazed at the contents: stacks of government bonds, sealed envelopes, antique coins wrapped in cloth, and the yellowed letter from Frank's grandfather. Tears filled her eyes. She had nothing, and yet she had everything. Margaret sat in silence for a long while, staring at the treasure. She knew this wasn't just about money. It was about worth, about how people treat each other when they think you have nothing left. Her own son had cast her aside like garbage. And yet, here she was, with enough to buy houses, start charities, rebuild lives. She could go back and tell Jacob. She could show him what he had thrown away. Maybe that would make him sorry. But Margaret wasn't sure she wanted to. This money, this secret, it was hers now, and it came with a power she had never imagined. Not the power to buy things, but the power to choose what kind of life she wanted next. That night, Margaret lit a fire in the fireplace and made a bed on the couch. As she lay there, the stars twinkled through the window. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. She made a decision. She would stay for a while. In the cabin, rest, think, and make a plan. Then she would use the money, but not to get revenge. She would use it to build something beautiful, something lasting. A future that proved her worth didn't depend on whether people liked her or not. The world had forgotten her, but she would. Reminded, Margaret sat by the fire with the secret treasure in her lap, not sure whether to cry or smile. She had been tossed aside like a burden, forgotten by her own son. But now, with $8.5 million hidden in a box at her feet, she realized something powerful. She wasn't just a mother cast out. She was a woman reborn, with a second chance at life no one could steal. The sun rose over the forest, painting golden streaks across the trees. Birds sang their morning songs, and the cabin, quiet, strong, and full of memory, stood like a sentinel of the past and a doorway to the future. Margaret opened her eyes to the scent of wood smoke and pine. She stretched her arms, her old bones cracking, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She hadn't slept that well since Frank died. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal cooked on the old wood stove, Margaret sat at the small table and opened the metal box once more. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through the contents: government bonds, antique gold coins, property deeds, and a letter. She unfolded the letter again. It was written in thick, cursive handwriting by Frank's grandfather, dated back to 1949. To whoever finds this, know that this treasure was earned, not given. I built it through hard work, wise choices, and luck. But the real wealth isn't what's in this box. It's the wisdom to use it well. If you're reading this, I trust you. Spend it not on yourself, but on purpose. Help those who need it. Heal what's broken. Leave behind more than you take. Margaret touched the paper like it was sacred. Tears welled up in her eyes. She knew what she had to do. Over the next few days, Margaret cleaned the cabin, patched leaks and restocked firewood. She took daily walks into town, carefully dressed and quiet, just an old lady. No one paid much attention to. No one asked where she came from, and she liked it that way. At the small Ravens Hollow library, she used the old computer to do research. She learned how to convert the bonds into money quietly. She opened a P.O. box and found a discreet financial advisor in Charleston who specialized in estate transitions. She didn't want Jacob to find out. Not yet. Not until she was ready. Margaret also looked for causes that mattered to her. Shelters, for women, food banks, struggling students who couldn't afford college. She made a list in a little notebook she titled Hope Projects. Each night she'd sit on the porch, the sound of cicadas humming in the background, and write out ideas for how to use the money. She'd never felt more alive. But one morning, something unexpected happened. A knock on the cabin door. Margaret froze. No one knew she was here. She opened the door slowly and saw a teenage girl standing on the porch. Her coat was torn, her shoes muddy, and her eyes were red from crying. "Hi," the girl said quietly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I saw the smoke from the chimney. I was walking and I got lost." Margaret opened the door wider. "Come in, sweetheart. You're safe here." The girl hesitated, then stepped inside. Margaret gave her warm tea, a blanket, and a bowl of stew. As the girl warmed up, she told her story. Her name was Lena. She had run away from a foster home in Kentucky. She was 17, alone and afraid. Margaret listened closely. She remembered what it was like to be young and lost, unsure who to trust. "You can stay here tonight," Margaret said. "No questions, just rest." Lena looked at her with tears in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind?" Margaret smiled, gently. "Because someone needs to be." Over the next few days, Lena stayed and helped around the cabin. She was quiet but respectful, with sharp eyes and a bruised heart. Margaret didn't pry, and Lena didn't share much, but a bond began to form. They laughed while chopping vegetables. They told stories by candlelight. They watched the stars together and dreamed of better days. One evening, Lena asked Margaret, "What's your story?" Margaret thought for a long time. "My son kicked me out," she said softly. "He said I was a burden, that I had nothing left to give." Lena blinked. "What did you do?" "I walked away, but I found something. Something I had hidden a long time ago, and now I get to choose who I want to be." Lena stared at her. "You're not just a lady in a cabin, are you?" Margaret chuckled. "Not anymore." As winter crept closer, Margaret knew she had to act. The money couldn't sit in the box forever. She called her advisor and arranged the first transfers. Quiet donations were made to the local food pantry and the town's medical clinic. An anonymous scholarship was started at the community college. But Margaret had something bigger in mind. She was going to open a home for women like her, cast aside, forgotten, alone. A warm place in the woods, safe and full of hope. She would call it Franklin House in honor of the man who taught her kindness and the family legacy now giving others a second chance. And she would start with Lena. "I want you to stay," Margaret said one evening, handing her a small key. "This place isn't much," she smiled, "but it's safe, and it's yours too if you want it." Lena stared at the key, speechless. "No one's ever wanted me before," she whispered. "I do," Margaret replied, "because you matter, just like I do. We're not done yet." That night, two women sat by the fire in a little cabin. In the woods, an old soul reborn, and a young one just beginning, and neither of them was alone anymore. Jacob paced the empty living room, the echo of his mother's last words haunting the silence. "You'll regret this someday." At first, he had felt relief. No more tension, no more guilt. But now, the quiet in his home didn't bring peace. It brought shame. He hadn't just kicked his mother out. He had closed the door on something deeper, something that was about to come back and change his life forever. Jacob sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through bills. The silence in the house gnawed at him. Since Margaret left, things hadn't felt right. His wife, Tina, was cold. His kids avoided eye contact, and the guilt had grown heavy, like a coat he couldn't take off. "I know what people are saying," Tina had told him the night after Margaret left. "But I don't care. She was your responsibility, not mine." Jacob had nodded, too tired to fight. He had always listened to Tina, trying to keep the peace. But Margaret's face, her eyes filled with quiet pain, lingered in his memory. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. He hadn't heard from her in weeks. Meanwhile, in the quiet town of Ravens Hollow, Margaret's world was blooming. Word had spread, quietly at first, about an anonymous donor helping people in the area. The food pantry received new freezers. The clinic got an updated exam room. Struggling mothers began receiving grocery vouchers. People whispered about the mysterious angel in the woods. Margaret made sure to keep her identity hidden. She didn't want attention. She wanted to watch goodness grow, slowly and quietly. Lena was thriving. She had enrolled in GED classes and volunteered at the local shelter. Margaret had become her family, and Lena, in turn, gave Margaret something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Sometimes, Lena said one afternoon while planting flowers outside the cabin, "I wonder what your son would say if he saw all this." Margaret looked up, a sad smile on her face. "I wonder that too." Jacob's curiosity finally got the better of him. It started with a small news article online: "Mysterious donations lift up small South Carolina town." He clicked. His heart skipped. There, in a photo, was the Ravens Hollow food pantry, one he hadn't thought about in years. His mother had mentioned visiting that area once, a long time ago. Then came a second article about the new scholarship at the community college. Something tugged at him. The donations were specific, just like the kind of causes his mother cared about. It couldn't be, could it? The next day, Jacob sat in his car outside his office, hands gripping the wheel. He was a proud man. Apologies didn't come easy, but something about this felt wrong, or maybe it felt right. He made a decision. He would go to Ravens Hollow. It was a cloudy Tuesday when Jacob drove into the quiet town. The streets were lined with mom-and-pop stores, friendly faces, and American flags fluttering in the breeze. He stopped by the food pantry first. "Hi," he said to the woman at the front desk. "I was wondering, do you know who made the recent donations?" The woman smiled, guarded. "We get a lot of support from kind folks." "But this one? The freezer? The new stock?" She narrowed her eyes. "Sorry, sir. The donor asked to stay anonymous." He nodded, disappointed but not surprised. Then he tried the library, and then the community college. Same answer everywhere: anonymous. Still, a seed of hope had been planted, and how cruel he had been. He realized something simple but powerful. He missed her. Back at the cabin, Margaret sat on the porch with Lena, sipping tea. She was thinking about the same man, her son, wondering if he ever looked back, wondering if she still mattered to him, even just a little. A storm was coming. She could feel it in her knees. "Tomorrow," she told Lena, "I want to visit the land in Charleston, the one Frank bought. You think you'll build something there?" Lena asked. Margaret smiled. "Maybe a second Franklin house, maybe a garden. I don't know. I just want to see it with my own eyes before I decide." Lena nodded. "I'll pack us a lunch." They didn't know Jacob was already on his way there, too. The next day, as the clouds rolled in over Charleston, 3 separate lives were moving toward a single moment. Jacob stood at the edge of the empty land, confused. He had asked around and learned it had recently been transferred to a trust called Franklin Legacy Foundation. That name. His father's name. He felt the wind pick up as a beat-up pickup truck pulled into the gravel path. He turned. His heart nearly stopped. Out stepped his mother. The world paused. Margaret saw Jacob standing there, older, tired, heavier in the face, but still her son. Neither of them spoke at first. Then Jacob said the words she had longed to hear. "Mom, I'm sorry." She had waited years to hear it. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." But as Jacob stood on that Charleston soil, his eyes wet and full of guilt, Margaret didn't feel triumph. She felt the aching weight of time lost, words unspoken, and a wound that might never fully heal. Some apologies come too late, and sometimes they come just in time. Jacob stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or fall to his knees. The woman in front of him, his mother, looked different. Her clothes were simple, her hair pulled back into a soft grey bun, and there was a glow about her he hadn't seen in years. Not since before Dad died, not since the burden of everything had settled onto her shoulders. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said quietly. I could say the same. Margaret took a deep breath and looked out across the field. "This land was the only thing your father ever bought for himself," she said. "He dreamed of building something here, a garden, a home, a place where people could find peace." Jacob looked around. "It's beautiful." "It is." There was a long pause. Then Jacob spoke again. "I need to explain." Margaret's eyes returned to his. "Then explain." They sat on a weathered bench at the edge of the field, clouds rolling gently above them. Jacob talked, haltingly at first, then with more honesty than he'd allowed himself in years. He spoke of pressure, of Tina, of the house that always felt too small for all the tension they carried, of being a father and a husband and a man who had too often chosen convenience over kindness. "I told myself you were fine," he admitted, "that you didn't need us, but deep down I think I just didn't want to face how much I needed you." Margaret listened, silent. "I was wrong," he whispered, "so wrong." He looked at her then, expecting anger, but Margaret didn't. She didn't scold, she simply reached for his hand. "You hurt me, Jacob, deeply, but I still love you." Those words broke something inside him. His face crumpled. For the first time in decades he wept like a boy, not a man holding everything together, and Margaret let him. Later they walked the field together. Jacob noticed the markers, small wooden stakes in the ground with names. "What are these?" Margaret smiled. "Names of people we've helped. Each stake is someone who got a new start because of your father's money." Jacob blinked. "Dad's money?" Margaret nodded. $8.5 million. He nearly choked. "What?" "He made some smart moves before he died. I never told anyone, not even you. I wanted it to be used for good, not greed, so I kept it hidden, quietly invested it, grew it, protected it." Jacob stared at her in disbelief. "All these years, you were rich?" "I was never rich," she said gently. "But I was responsible for something powerful, something that could help others." Jacob ran a hand through his hair. "I feel like the biggest fool on earth." "You were angry, scared, maybe selfish, but you're not a fool. Not now." Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Lena paced. She hadn't heard from Margaret all morning. Her phone calls had gone unanswered. Something didn't feel right. She thought about the stranger who had shown up at the edge of town asking questions about donations. She didn't trust it. Grabbing her keys, she drove toward the Charleston property, praying Margaret was safe. As Lena approached the field, she saw the two figures standing near the tree line, Margaret and Jacob. Her heart slowed. They were talking. Jacob's posture was gentle, his eyes softer. Lena parked and approached. Margaret turned and smiled. "Lena, I was just thinking about you." Jacob looked confused. "Who's this?" "This," Margaret said, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder, "is the daughter I found when my own shut me out." Lena blushed. Jacob looked down in shame. "I'm glad she was there for you," he said honestly. Margaret nodded. "Me too." There was silence between the three of them, complicated but not heavy. Then Margaret turned to both of them. "I think it's time we stop hiding from the past. It's time to build something new." Later that day, they sat on the porch of the cabin. Margaret made sweet tea. Lena cooked biscuits. Jacob, humbled and quiet, listened. He learned about Franklin House, the people they'd helped, the lives they'd touched. He saw photo albums of volunteers and handwritten thank you letters. Each page was proof of what his mother had done, not just with money, but with faith. "I never knew," he said again and again. "You didn't ask," Margaret replied gently. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the trees, Jacob turned to his mother. "What happens now?" Margaret smiled. "Now we rebuild." Margaret never wanted to hold money over anyone's head, but the truth had to come out. The money her son threw away with his cruelty wasn't just lost. It had been protected in a way he never imagined. And now, what she wrote in her will would shape not only his future, but his heart. The next morning brought a warm breeze and birdsong. Margaret stood on the back porch, a mug of tea in her hand. She watched the dew glisten over the grass, the same field where her husband once dreamed of planting a future. Jacob stepped out quietly, joining her. "Morning," he said as good morning. He looked out over the land. "I had a dream last night." "Oh?" "I was a kid again. Dad was showing me how to fix the lawnmower. Said, 'Son, taking care of what you have is the best way to earn more.' Funny how that never stuck." Margaret smiled faintly. "Maybe it did. Just took a while to bloom." Jacob sighed. "Mom, I know I can't undo what I did. I know Tina and we were wrong. But I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to try." Margaret didn't respond at first. She sipped her tea slowly. Then she reached inside her cardigan and pulled out a folded document. "What's that?" Jacob asked. "My will." He blinked. "Your will?" She nodded. "I've been changing it, updating it, for years. This is the latest version." Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he took it. He read in silence, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning line after line. His face changed as he read the final pages. You're giving away most of it. To charity, to people in need, to organizations that serve the forgotten. It's what your father and I always wanted. But there's nothing left for me." She placed a gentle hand on his. "There's something more important than money. There's a lesson and a second chance, but I'm not leaving you out, Jacob. You just have to earn it." He looked up at her, stunned. "Earn it?" Margaret nodded. "You're still my son, but I can't pretend the past didn't happen. Trust isn't a gift, it's a garden. It takes time and care to grow." Meanwhile, Lena was inside the cabin, packing boxes of food and supplies. A family of 4 from a nearby town had just lost everything in a fire. Margaret had already arranged for them to move into one of the cottages on the land. Jacob wandered in. "Need help?" Lena glanced at him. "You sure you want to?" "I do. I need to start somewhere." She handed him a box. "Then start with this. And don't drop it." He grinned sheepishly. "Got it." As they loaded the truck together, Lena found herself softening. Maybe people could change. Or maybe pain just made people real. Later that afternoon, Jacob sat in the field alone, holding the will. He kept rereading the part where Margaret stated, "To my son, Jacob, I leave the land, but only on condition that he uses it to serve others. If he sells it for profit, the full value will be donated instead. This land is not for greed, it is for growth." Tears welled in his eyes. She wasn't punishing him, she was challenging him. The next day, Margaret took Jacob to the hidden safe. In her small office, tucked behind an old portrait of his father, inside, stacks of documents, trust deeds, and donation records lay carefully arranged. "This," she said, "is the proof of what's been done, of what's still possible." Jacob stared in silence. "How did you keep all this secret?" "I didn't need attention. I needed peace." He nodded slowly. "I want to be part of it," he said. "I want to help, not for the money, for you, for Dad, for me." Margaret's eyes watered. "Then we begin again." Over the next few weeks, Jacob stayed. He helped with deliveries, sat with veterans at the shelter, listened to single mothers tell their stories. He began to see what his mother had built, not with concrete or wealth, but with compassion. One night, He sat with Lena by a fire pit as the stars blinked above. "She could have just disowned me," he said. "Most people would have." "She could have," Lena agreed, "but she chose grace. That's a harder kind of love." He nodded. "I don't deserve it. None of us do." They sat in silence, the flames crackling between them. Margaret watched from inside the cabin window, her heart full. Her son was finally beginning to understand not just the money, but the mission, the legacy, the truth that giving doesn't diminish what you have, it multiplies it. And still, in her room each night, Margaret opened the small, wooden chest beside her bed, where she kept the original bank statement. $8.5 million. A fortune born from sacrifice, now breathing life into others. She kissed her fingers and touched the top of the chest. "Thank you, Tom," she whispered. "We did it!" Jacob had spent years burning bridges with his mother. Now, every step he took on this old land was a step toward healing. But forgiveness isn't easy, and love, real love, sometimes means facing the hardest truths about yourself. Could he rebuild a family from ashes, or would the past always stand between them? The morning sun poured through the windows of the old cabin, casting warm light on a new beginning. Jacob stood at the porch, watching as volunteers arrived, eager to help with the first renovation project on the Franklin land. Margaret handed him a hammer, smiling gently. "Ready?" she asked. He took the hammer, feeling its weight. "I'm ready." Over the next days, the sound of hammering, laughter, and quiet conversations filled the air. Jacob worked alongside people he barely knew, helping to fix the roof of a small cottage that would soon become a home for families in need. He met old veterans, single moms, and kids who dreamed of better days. Each story was a reminder of why his mother had fought so hard, why his father had planted seeds years ago. One afternoon, as Jacob hammered a nail into the wood, Lena came over. "Doing all right?" she asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Jacob smiled. "Better than I expected. It's strange. I always thought giving was about money. Now I see it's about time and heart." Lena nodded. "It's the hardest kind of giving." That evening, Jacob and Margaret sat by the fire pit. The stars blinked above them, and for the first time in a long time, silence felt like peace. "Mom," Jacob began, "I want to ask you something." Margaret looked at him, waiting. "Why? Did you never tell me about the money? Why keep it all hidden?" She sighed. "Because I was afraid that if you knew, you'd see me as greedy, afraid that you'd want to use it, or worse, that it would change who you are." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I needed that lesson." Margaret smiled. "It's not too late to learn it now." The next week, Tina came to visit. Jacob's hands trembled as he opened the door. They hadn't spoken since Margaret was kicked out. Tina looked around the cabin, then at the work in progress. "This place, it's amazing." Jacob nodded. "It's my mother's legacy, and it's becoming ours." Tina sighed. "I was wrong. We both were. Maybe it's time we try again, for the kids." Jacob took her hand. "I want that too." The town of Ravens Hollow started to buzz with hope. News spread about the Franklin Legacy Foundation and the work being done. On the land, volunteers came from nearby cities. Local businesses donated supplies. Margaret watched it all with quiet pride. Her son was becoming the man she hoped he could be. But healing wasn't linear. One afternoon, Jacob and Lena argued. "You're trying to fix everything too fast," she said. "You have to be patient, with yourself and with others." Jacob frowned. "I just want to make up for lost time." Lena's eyes softened. "I know, but healing takes time. You can't rush the heart." Jacob took a deep breath. "Thanks for reminding me." Days turned into weeks. Margaret's health remained fragile, but her spirit was strong. One evening, Jacob helped her into the garden behind the cabin, a small patch of earth she had planted herself. They knelt together, planting seeds for a new season. "This garden," Margaret said, "is like our family. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's painful, but with care, it grows." Jacob smiled, feeling the earth between his fingers. "I'm ready to care." As spring approached, the Franklin house began to take shape. The roof was fixed, the walls painted, the garden blooming. The community came together for the housewarming, a celebration not just of a building, but of second chances. Jacob gave a speech. "To my mother, who never gave up on me, and to everyone here who believes in hope, we're building more than a house. We're building bridges." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. Jacob caught her hand, squeezing it gently. The past was still there, but so was the future. Just when Jacob thought the worst was behind them, the past reached out with a cold hand. Hidden secrets, locked away for years, began to surface, threatening everything Margaret had worked so hard to protect. Sometimes the truth can heal, but other times it can shatter what little peace remains. The sun was setting over Raven's Hollow, painting the sky in orange and pink hues. Jacob was inside the Franklin house, organizing papers and files from the Foundation's office. Margaret was resting upstairs, exhausted but happy. Suddenly, Jacob's phone rang. It was a call from a lawyer he didn't recognize. "Mr. Franklin," the voice asked, "I'm calling about your father's estate." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" "There's been a claim filed by a distant relative, your father's brother's daughter. She alleges she was left out of the will unfairly." Jacob's mind raced. "That can't be true." "We'll need to discuss this further," the lawyer said. "There may be a court case." The call ended, leaving Jacob staring at his phone in disbelief. Jacob found Margaret in the kitchen, making tea. "Mom," he said slowly, "there's someone challenging Dad's will." Margaret's hands trembled. "I hoped this day wouldn't come." Jacob felt the weight of years pressed down on his chest. "Can we fight it? We have to." The next days were filled with meetings, paperwork, and legal battles. The news spread quietly through the town, whispers of family drama, of money and betrayal. Jacob felt the old pain rise again, the feeling of being judged, misunderstood, and alone. One afternoon, Lena sat beside him. "We'll get through this," she said softly. "But you have to trust yourself." Jacob nodded, though doubt lingered. Meanwhile, Margaret dug through old boxes in the attic of the Franklin house. Dusty letters, forgotten photos, and journals lay hidden. She found a letter from her late husband, Tom, his handwriting shaky but clear. "Margaret, if anything happens to me, protect the family. Trust no one who seeks to take what is not theirs." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming. The day of the court hearing arrived. Jacob sat beside Margaret, hands tightly clasped. The opposing lawyer presented their case, questioning the validity of the will, the secrecy of the fortune, and Jacob's right to the land. Jacob felt the room close in around him. But then Margaret stood. She spoke with quiet strength. "This land, this money, this foundation, my family built it. With love and sacrifice, I stand by the will my husband left me. We will protect this legacy." The judge listened carefully. After what felt like hours, the verdict was clear. The court upheld the will. Outside the courthouse, Jacob breathed deeply. Margaret smiled, tired but triumphant. "We won." Jacob pulled her into a hug. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this." Margaret shook her head. "It only made me stronger." That night, as the stars shone over Raven's Hollow, Jacob sat on the porch with Lena. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said. "But we're together," she replied. Jacob looked up at the sky. "For the first time, I feel like we can face whatever comes. After years of pain, betrayal, and secrets, the chance for a fresh start finally arrived. But true new beginnings aren't built on money alone. They're built on trust, forgiveness, and the courage to move forward. For Jacob and Margaret, this was more than just rebuilding a home. It was rebuilding a family. The morning air was crisp as sunlight spilled over the rolling hills of Ravens Hollow. Jacob stood outside the Franklin house, now fully restored, its white paint gleaming in the early light. Margaret was already in the garden, tending to the flowers she loved. Jacob walked over and sat beside her on the wooden bench. "Mom," he said softly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For never giving up on me. For keeping the family together when I wanted to tear it apart." Margaret smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "You're my son. That's what family does." That day, the community gathered for the opening of the new Franklin Legacy Center, a place where people could find help, hope, and a fresh start. Jacob stood at the podium, heart pounding. "This center isn't just a building," he told the crowd. "It's a promise that no matter your past, you can have a future." Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she watched her son speak. He was no longer the angry young man who had thrown her out. He was a leader, a man shaped by mistakes and healed by love. After the ceremony, Jacob found Lena among the crowd. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. He took her hand. "Thank you for believing in me," she smiled. "We're in this together." Later that evening, Jacob and Margaret sat by the fire pit, wrapped in blankets. "Do you remember when Dad planted that oak tree?" Jacob asked. Margaret nodded. "He said it would grow strong if we cared for it." Jacob looked at the tree, silhouetted against the moonlight. "I think we're like that tree. We've weathered storms, but we're still standing." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand, stronger than ever. As weeks passed, the Franklin Legacy Foundation flourished. Families found shelter, veterans found support, and the town found hope. Jacob and Margaret worked side by side, their bond growing deeper. One afternoon, Jacob received a letter. It was from his estranged sister, the daughter Margaret had kept secret all those years. She wanted to meet. Jacob hesitated, then called Lena. "Maybe it's time to bring her home," he said. Lena smiled. "I think that's a beautiful idea." As spring blossomed fully, the Franklin family grew, not just by blood, but by love and forgiveness. Jacob knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time, he was ready. After storms of pain, secrets, and broken trust, the moment had finally come. Jacob's heart pounded as he opened the door to the woman who might complete their family. Could forgiveness truly bring them all home? Or was the past still waiting to tear them apart? Sometimes the greatest journey is the one back to love. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the Franklin house. Jacob stood by the porch, hands deep in his pockets, nerves twisting inside him. Today was the day. His sister, Emily, was coming home. Years of silence, distance, and unanswered questions loomed between them. He remembered the moment he found out about her, hidden away, unknown, a secret his mother carried like a precious treasure. The doorbell rang. Jacob's heart leapt. He opened the door to find a young woman standing there, eyes bright but cautious. "Emily?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears glistening. "Jacob." They stood frozen for a moment, two halves of a broken whole. Margaret appeared behind Jacob, her eyes wet with hope and fear. "This is your sister," Jacob said, voice trembling. Emily stepped inside, looking around the home she never knew. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Margaret reached out, pulling Emily into a warm embrace. "We've waited a long time for this." Over the next days, the house filled with laughter, stories, and shared memories. Emily told of her life, the hardships, the loneliness. Jacob listened, realizing how much they had missed. But beneath the pain was a bond, stronger than years apart. One evening, the whole family gathered around the fire pit. Margaret handed Emily a small, worn box. "Your father left this for you," she said. Inside were letters, photos, and a necklace with a small oak leaf charm, the symbol of their family's strength. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "This means everything," she said. Jacob looked at his mother and sister, feeling a peace he hadn't known before. "This is home," he whispered. Margaret smiled. "Home is where the heart forgives." The next morning, Jacob and Emily planted a new oak tree in the garden, one they would care for together. As the roots sank deep into the earth, Jacob felt the future bloom. No longer haunted by the past, they were ready to grow. Together. The Franklin legacy was no longer just about money or land. It was about family, forgiveness, and hope. And finally, they were home.